How's everybody doing? While I do this, it's like stand-up crowd work. Where are you from? Yeah, I was getting frantic texts. Where are you? We showed up exactly at 9:00 because I had to find the 2014 shirt, which at the time we had somebody did some outline designs, and I'm like, we need a shirt. And I'm like, we could get a design shirt, or I could just, copy, paste in Photoshop and design my own shirt, which is basically what I did, if you couldn't tell. Okay, I think we're ready. So, hi, let's just roll right into it. I thought there was an hour for this for some reason. I don't know if it was brain fart or I looked at it 2 weeks ago, and then last night when I got home, it's like 45 minutes. So there's some surgery, and some of this will go fast. There might be a slide transition. It doesn't make quite sense, but just keep rolling. A bit about me. I think a few years ago, if I came up here, I'd be like, well, I don't know much about you, but I recognize that guy, but, COVID and everything. So I was doing Android before there were phones. We had first clients in 2010, Touch Lab, legally in 2011. The Android meetup for a long time, as Greg mentioned, droidcon NYC. 2014, that other technology for a while, and then KMP, everything sets, right? That's kind of what I've been doing. Some other stuff that I do, that kind of thing, lots of libraries, the foundation, and blah, blah, blah. But basically making Android stuff work on the iPhone since 2015. So droidcon NYC at 10 years. Let's get in the Wayback Machine a little further back than 10 to 2013. It's story time. So at the time, Touch Lab is New York's Android shop. We make only Android apps. And at the time, everyone else made iPhone apps. So that gave us an interesting advantage. Android, meetup and all that kind of stuff. I think if you were sort of involved in the Android community, again, you might not know who I was, but at least I might be familiar. And then, interestingly, over in London was a shop called Navoda. And Navoda was an Android shop that ran an Android meetup run by someone at the time named Kevin. And it was really interesting, kind of doppelganger situation. And then there was this rumor that this was going to be happening, droidcon NYC by Navoda. And we were like, well, that doesn't make any goddamn sense. So here we go. And that was not the entirety of the decision process, but it wasn't not involved. So that's what happened, right? And at the time, if you want to know the wild silliness, there was actually a concern that, in the US, Lucasfilm might be a little more aggressive about their Droid brand. So we were like, I wonder if they're going to come after us. And then we kind of decided, well, if they come after us, that's better press than anything. Well, they never did. And they still haven't. So maybe shush. Maybe they haven't heard, but I don't think they care. So 2014, MetPav. MetPav is this place. It's in Manhattan. And I hadn't actually seen the place before we put down the deposit. And I had this moment. I had to look after, and I was like, I don't know if I have to worry about Touch Lab much longer because I don't think we're going to survive. It is absolutely huge. And we had never run a conference. When you run a meetup, you show up. They got pizza and beers, and you get on stage. Maybe you're prepared, maybe you're not. You wing it, you go home, right? Not a meetup. I would say Jeff gets all of the credit for thinking big and then figuring it out. And I will say, if you're the sponsors, you don't quite understand. Regionally, it's somewhat different, but for these kind of conferences, the majority of the revenue and the thing that makes this happen is sponsors. So even if you don't care about what they're doing, just go say hi and pretend like you do, please. So, I probably would have had a 200-person event. At the time, Microsoft had some, open source cool office because they were trying to convince people they were cool. But we didn't. And again, Jeff was the one with the big plans. Not that we didn't lose money. For sure we lost money. But some tips. If you are going to run a community conference, make sure that you don't give the venue a deposit before you know who their vendors are, particularly AV, because negotiating with one option is hard. Renting gear is expensive, but I assure you after the conference, you're going to want to go immediately home. Very specific to this area, B&H is not open on Friday afternoons, and coincidentally, do not generally have a weekend conference because the part of this is getting to leave town and take time off work and hang out. We learn these things the first year. And also video companies seem expensive. until you tried DIY, especially DIY you frantically bought in a run around various Best Buys in the city because of B&H. And again, sorry about the 2014 videos. We learned a lot. So, first DroidCon NYC app with some Kotlin in 2014. It was so early that we didn't just crash the VM, like the VM stopped on some class. I had no idea why. We just figured out what was going on, and then we just removed the thing. But still, it was in there. Instead of worrying about finances, I got super nerdy, and I'm like, let's add this thing where if you build the app from source, you have an opportunity to get this ticket, right? Gold and silver ticket. Gold ticket was actually a free ticket to the conference. Spoilers, that year, it was not hard to get a free ticket to the conference if you looked around. NetPab is huge. Anyway, sponsors make this possible again. Show them some love, please. So, some photos. This is generally the one that I see that's like, okay, this is the all-action perfect timing photos. By our Android community stalwarts, Sony. They were making a really big play back then to really get into the Android developers, mind share. And I was looking at the photos and Sony open source. And I didn't look at it then. I went to look at it now. And there's Sony open source and it's Android. And it is exactly AOSP. And if you get some Sony phones, they don't say which, you can flash a fully bare bones AOSP, which I think is nice of them. That is the entirety of the Android open source, by the way. And we have some, very familiar faces that are still with us, and we want to say thank you to them. It's been years. Actually, come on. Did Jeff and I sneak out to a bar allegedly in the afternoon? For a little while, maybe. I won't admit to that, but I'll say every conference is stressful, but your first conference is like you have no idea, especially if you've never run a conference, by definition first. So, I don't have a pic, but DroidCon Montreal, Marcos, we found him in the code closet taking a nap on his first day, just straight out. Anyway, it was fun, and it was life-changing, and everything was different. And who could forget the party? Best party ever. You have no idea. Way more expensive than you'd expect. So here we go. We're going to go down memory lane. Let's see. Audio doesn't work. I had a little audio joke. I was playing Time of Your Life, but then I cut it off because who wants to listen to that the whole time? So, sign up desk, here's the ever-present line. Hello. Here's the tags. You will recognize some names who are actually here today. Cool people photo time. Here's the sponsors that were gracing us with their presence that year. Here's some Touch Labber and friends. Very excitedly jumping for the sponsors. Some familiar faces who you may recognize. Some other familiar faces you may recognize. That's a picture of Jake, I promise. Whoever tells you that the internet pictures live forever, and I'm like, great, well, where are they? Because, oh my God, finding photos is really difficult. I don't know what these are, but they look cool. More familiar faces. Who's that guy? More crowd shots. And then we've got, we try to explain to sponsors, if you stand at the table and you're very salesy, developers are like, maybe if you have something cool. So there was this cool game, and that was pretty neat. More crowd shots. I've been sitting in a room writing slides for days, and I don't know why this guy's burned into my brain, but he's there. And, so it was great. Was it stressful? Oh my God. Did it feel great at the time? It's hard to explain, but it was an amazing experience, unforgettable. So thank yous for that year and honestly for everybody that keeps DroidCon great. So again, Jeff, I don't know if we'd be here. Maybe someone else would have run it, but it certainly would have been what it was if Jeff wasn't characteristically optimistic about obviously bad ideas. That's what I wrote in there. All right, sorry, Jeff. Lucasfilm, thanks for, and Android community, there are people today that were at the first event. Some of them you saw, some of them were speaking. And, I'm not sure, I have to check, maybe all the events in between. Community events are very difficult to run, and I would say that they're more rare these days. I mean, maybe in our corner of the world, but it seems to be true kind of generally. And industry events are fun, like the big company industry events, but you really can't say anything that they don't love. You know what I mean? It's kind of hard to have dissent. And that's important for how things work. I mean, I think if there was no dissent in the Android community, we might still be talking about async tests, no offense. And or almost get your talk approved to have a T-shirt done. Weird stuff. I vetoed that. Why? You might get lawsuits, but don't go looking for them. Anyway, Greg, very much great. Like the droidcon family in general, but Greg, I mean, the droidcon team is great, but I don't think you quite understand how much this continues to exist at the level that it does, and maybe at all. Greg runs this amazing, and he really cares about this. So if you see Greg, say hi. If you have something you want to complain about, compliment sandwich, just as good a suggestion, you know what I mean? Take it easy on Greg. And also, this is 2015 droidcon. This is Natalie, but we're married. We did meet through droidcon. Hello. Sorry, Bink. All right. 2024. Where is the Android community today? And I would say first, a lot of external changes, right? So we talked about this a lot recently, and COVID and remote, right? Like obviously you couldn't hang out with people in COVID, but then remote made it kind of weird, right? If you're leaving work and going home, like you'll stop by for a meetup. If you have an hour and a half commute up in Westchester, you're not coming down for pizza very likely. And that's changed the dynamic. And then meetup itself, that wasn't a good story. I don't know what's going on over there. And I don't know what meetups are like, but meetup itself, oh my God. And very similar Twitter, like the Twitter Android community essentially just evaporated for reasons. And that used to be kind of the place where it was leveled and you could just reach out to everybody. And I don't know where that is now. This isn't specific to Android, but we are at a community event. So if anybody wants to chat about this, and I think we should have these chats going, like, what does this look like going forward, right? Can we find something that's a little more cohesive or at least feels a little more together? Maybe it's Mastodon. I don't know, but I don't know what. But today, the Android community is here. And I don't mean like some people who do Android are here. This might be ego. It's probably ego. But, this event in particular, especially early on, it started and it's continued since then. We've always preferred the deep dives, like advanced topics, right? Maybe something controversial. Maybe just something really weird. This has been a place where, you're not going to hear about how getting started with Recycler Review or whatever, right? Not much. Anyway, and that, plus getting someone to pay for a trip to New York so you can party, has turned this into a focused event where you get the people doing stuff in Android have always been coming here. Not everybody, but enough to get a good slice of the community. So if you want to know what's going on, if you want to hear what people are thinking about trying, or if you have a message you want to get out, this is a really good place to do it. So what are Android devs doing in between then and now? And I've been copy pasting these slides for the last couple of years, but this is unscientific, but a general sense. Way back when, on the scale of when do you really want to start doing native, depending on how complex your app is and how sensitive you are to UX, it's pretty far over here. Everyone was doing native, right? And it's more like this now, right? That's just, I think it's obvious. I get not numbers and not universally, but this seems to be the trend. So in 2014, it's where are the mobile devs? I mean, in 2014, it wasn't even where are the mobile devs. It's the startup is an app, for everything. 2018-ish, it's we're looking at these other things, maybe native, and this is kind of this is the conversation. Again, not universally, but let's just say general trends. So is that a problem? It's an observation, and I grossly oversimplified one, but I'll get back to that. So preparing a keynote, it is way more stressful than reviewing keynotes. And I kind of made a list of what's a good keynote made up of? It should be entertaining, kind of relevant, hopefully. You don't want to be a bummer, but I also threw in call to action at the end. Hey, what are we doing now? Let's go out and do something really cool. So how do you start? Well, just go look at what other people are talking about at their keynotes, see what the vibe is. And I took a sample, and it's look back. And the audio's not working, so that joke doesn't get to be done twice with time of your life. Anyway, and that's fine. This is the 10-year. I mean, I could have gone digging through the boxes or whatever and found more slides and pictures and could have told you weird stories. But it was all of them. And I don't mean almost, every one of them was hey, let's talk about what we did. All right, it was a little this for me. Maybe it's just a vibe. I'm come on, what are we doing now? Let's talk about something new. Now, possibly sample size, I mean, it's not like I did a lot. I won't say which ones, but I definitely was just like, oh, wow, that's look back. And it's probably also, I'd done the first part finding old photos and nostalgia. So it was like when the community's starting and it's growing and nobody knows what they're doing, message queues were hot for a while. Like, it's chaos, but it's fun chaos, Well, the Android community is doing a ton, right? Bigger apps depend more and more on this, and bigger products and bigger companies depend more and more on these apps. And as these apps and teams grow, like the complexity has grown considerably to produce really good Android. Android development in 2024, it's highly skilled, like specialized discipline, right? Like, yes, we're going to talk about new widgets and cool shit, but critical debates today are like modularized architecture and Gradle performance spanning org level modules all over the place, and debates about compose, but it's about the millisecond first render time at compose, not like this is fun. I mean, it's sort of a different level of thing. Again, not universally, but like it's very common, right? So, Android architecture chats used to be, try to sort this shit out, right? But now it's like how do you have, standardized architecture testable across teams and features and all that kind of stuff, right? So that leads to an interesting outcome, right? I would say the whole native is dying thing was started in 2014, not 2014, started at the beginning, 2008, 2007. And it keeps going on. Every few, couple of years, they're like, native's going to die, right? Eventually cross-platform's going to catch up and devices get better and blah, 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 blah. Native won't be a thing. And that's, of course, wrong. It's not how that went. Native apps are like critical to a certain class of product. Potentially saving some money or doing something risky is just a bad idea, right? So as a community, though, I think this finds us in an interesting, I call it like a Lagrange point, right? So new apps have sort of not really doing native so much anymore, but development of native apps has grown more complex. So the native community, and what it's focused on is in the aggregate shifted, right? And it hasn't like contracted, like it's not going away, right? It's just that the domains in which native are built have narrowed. And the necessity of complexity of those areas has grown significantly. So, I don't have hard numbers. I would guess factoring in the tech downturn, the native community has been growing, but it's also been consolidating around this area. And it's like, yes, it's all I do all day. I'm going to go into it, I'm sorry, it'll be over before you know it. But web and mobile are essential. And here's, the hype cycle curve, right? So the hype precedes the reality. And if you remember back then, the web hype, towards the top, I said this in fire. I'm like, well, it was this in the printing press. That's pretty close to fire. And then the hype goes away. But then over time, web is beyond essential. The modern world does not exist without web or broadly internet, right? Yeah. So, but web dev is essential too, and it's it's Vue versus React, whatever you want to talk about, but fundamentally it's JS and the DOM, unless you're really in the weeds doing some interesting shit. The mobile hype cycle looks very similar, and it was very similar. You know what I mean? There was a period of time where it was this is the printing press and the web. Mobile's going to replace, and then and everything was an app. Everything all started. We just said startup, it meant app. And then it kind of goes down. At least the excitement around mobile development, right? I guess I should be clear about that. The mobile development hype cycle kind of went down outside of mobile areas, but the utility, mobile is necessary for the modern world. It's just like the web, but in different ways. Many people, mobile is their primary or only way to access the digital world. Mobile is essential. And sorry for the red. Native mobile is not, right? Not for these people. They're the boring middle. That is not a Touch Lab marketing phrase. If you call someone's product boring, they don't like that very much. What do I mean by the boring middle? It's any product that needs mobile, but mobile's not really the product, right? That's a very simple summary of what I mean by that. This is Epic. It's a medical app, right? And my main doctor was not in any big system. It was somebody I found and they were their own practice, and it was like in the 90s. Like you'd go in 2 months later, and it's like, well, here's your results. I'm like, oh, great. And then he referred me to someone in a system with this, and I'm walking out of the doctor's office. I'm getting notifications with test results, and like you go to another doctor, and they have all your data, and everything's great. But as a mobile developer, when I open that app, like I have to shut off my brain. It is terrible. Like it is not a good experience. It's absolutely garbage, right? Like, now what are you going to do? So, 2014, it's like you ask people, like, what do you do? Third mobile dev at Chase. And, a startup, there's a web product, but I'm doing their native side hustle. I met someone who bought a car from their side hustle way back then, right? Now, 103rd mobile dev at Chase. Big apps. Native apps still, but they're really pushing freelance, right? That does seem to be the general trend. It's like, does that matter? Native mobile is not going anywhere as a career, as a thing, as a community. We're still getting together, blah, 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 blah. Good enough apps still work. So, not yet. And we're not going to be talking about shared logic. That's later. And by the way, in my spelunking for photos, the last time I spoke at DroidCon NYC was 2014. It was a really, really bad idea because there's no time. No time to work on the talk. You're busy with doing everything. It's a distraction. This slide was one of the good ones. I ran out of slides before the end of the talk, and I had to go from memory, right? I just never did it again. And today, I'm doing 2 talks. I don't know what the hell. Like, that's crazy. Come back here in an hour, too. So, the boring middle. What happened here? And more importantly, why did that take so long? What do I mean by that? Like, there was a period of time where a lot of these apps still went native, but they could have not, I think. And cross-platform is a capital B big decision with what we call a risk cliff. So if we're going to imagine a conversation with people doing product stuff, they're talking about these things. And basically the important part over here is what happens if React Native is not okay? Rewrite. So that would often force a lot of decisions. These days, it's a little different, right? At least some of the conversation. And the difference is, there's a risk cliff, but you're far less likely to fall off it. Like good enough is usually good enough, right? It's pretty good. So, okay. KMP and Compose. And I'm not talking about like, yes, this kind of works. What I'm talking about here is this becomes the new default choice for mobile. Here's the thing. Now, in your minds, we're all engineers. We're like, wow, this problem, we want to solve engineers. Just like take a breath. Imagine, forget timelines. And don't worry if React Native is everything. And, there's a parallel conference right downstairs talking about a mature product. Assume mechanical problems can be solved. Many of them quickly. I'll talk about it and just keep a positive mind as best you can. I know it's early. So, there's this concept of, I've been calling this, there's probably a better term we should come up with, maybe there is already, optionally shared UI. CMP is like fundamentally different technology-wise. So these things on paper are very similar. They're rendering a canvas, right? They have declarative things that, declarative languages that do stuff. They're very similar, so much so that Flutter people seemed upset about Compose. So, but the difference is like interop. Right? KMP and Compose, like they live directly in the same thing. They talk directly to Swift and Objective-C. It's always been the fundamental difference. And what does that mean? What does that give you? Well, you can mix Compose and Swift UI or UIKit, native iOS stuff. You can mix them directly in. You're not doing overlays. You're not doing whatever. You can share data objects, send messages back to KMP architecture. You can do this incrementally. Like you can do the whole app in Compose, and you're like, you know what? Let's do another thing. And make it as native as you want. And that empowers this concept like we've been calling the 80-20 UI. And it's only 80-20 because that's the name of the phrase, right? Maybe, it's 98-2 or whatever. Mostly KMP, but mostly native user experience. And I mean that in the literal sense. How much time the user is experiencing things. So users, they're mostly on the core screens almost all the time in any app, right? Compose, you can make almost everything else because the user's never really there, right? So the user's actual day-to-day user experience is 90% quote-unquote native. The code is, some huge amount of code shared. By the way, that's Apple Health. They're clearly never going to do this. But the screen on the left is the main screen. If you don't think there were multiple meetings about the radius of these various chart things, You would be crazy. And the thing on the right, if I showed you the composed version, you probably wouldn't even know. So there is no risk cliff. Perhaps a ledge. I don't say there's no risk. Of course, there's always risk. But a fully composed app on iOS might still be something you regret at the end. You're like, shit, I really wish we had done this. But you don't have to do a rewrite. You just, all right, just slap on some new screens. That's what you can do. So, and also in a very important distinction, like iOS is the only cross-platform part of this equation. Like you're building an Android app. Android's just Android. You're using Android tools to build it. It's true, right? So, like big apps, and I just said a lot of people work at big apps. You're probably not the target. You're like, I'm worried about this other thing. I totally get it, right? For the same reason you weren't the target for other things. Like the business and the product you're working on is too important to even worry about this, right? Heard something interesting last night, but we're cutting for time, so I'm not adding news stories. Big app, sorry. I didn't get to rehearse the cut and changed. We're working on something that's going out to an app with many millions of MAUs that's going to have composed, and they won't know it, the people using it, but that's okay. Is this just a team Android thing? I mean, we are at an Android conference, perhaps an Android Flutter wedding, but I care about this. Like, I just like good apps. Who does not like good apps? You know what I mean? If you can enable a better app experience with equivalent in variable costs, you can spend a little more and really juice up what the user's getting, right? That means better apps. I think that's great. And if who doesn't like to do a better thing? Would Flutter be fine? Of course. Especially in this app, I would be jazzed. But maybe CMP is potentially better than fine. Who knows? Again, you wouldn't notice on that app. It is not what you'd call a complex app. So I am not trying to do this. I would take either. I think mobile in general is definitely better with either. But again, but Compose is fully native on Android. It is optionally native on iOS and extends a mature existing ecosystem. Both are options, Flutter and Compose. I'm talking about the default option. That is the thing. Think through that, right? When you think about how we need to do mobile, and Compose is like, well, let's just do that. Also, I'm aware of the bias. Here I am at an Android event telling Compose is great, but still, it's different. So imagine this discussion in 22 whatever. Again, the difference is, what happens if things don't work out? And the answer is not much, right? That risk is gone, right? Now, here's another thing that I've been saying, and yes, you can add iOS native UIs, but most apps will not. But there's a distinction here. The fact that you can removes that risk up front. So that table of people have to make a decision up front, not really being very technical with imperfect information that they only get the answer to way down the road. And when they do, it's too late. So a lot of folks are like, we're thinking about Flutter or whatever, but they choose not to. That's the risk cliff upfront discussion, because it's not free to try Flutter. If you think about it from the perspective that you just don't have that risk, I wouldn't say it's free to try Compose, but you're going to be building Compose for Android anyway if you're doing native. It's a different equation. I know it's more complicated than that, but you know what I'm saying. You get to just to try it out without any real risk. So let's get off the Zen beach, right? And now you can't just pretend the world is all done and everything is great. This sounds great. It sounds like magic on a technical level. It's pretty great right now. I mean, I'll talk about it a little bit. But trying to pitch this to a tech lead who's not, very mobile focused or at an enterprise company, and forget a startup founder, right? It would be tough. So where are we? There's a lot to do, but it's closer than most people think. And I think that's the thing that needs to be brought to mind. So milestones, tech preview-ish. Talk about the app in a second. 2023 alpha, 2024 beta, 2025. I like trends. Imagine what's coming next. It's going rather fast. This app, actually, so we did it in 2022 for NYC. I am almost certain, talk to Tad, it's crazy work. it's the first app in the App Store with Compose. At the time, people were like, you can't actually put Compose on a real phone. And I don't know what they did. They figured it out. So I said, hey, let's try a screen. I'm sure it'll take us forever, but let's see you get a screen. We can touch base. We can say, hey, there's Compose in there. It went fast. We had some people on the bench, and we just said, all right, just keep going. Was it great? No, we had to hack around a lot of weird shit, like different color profiles would crash the app and images and stuff. But, you know, if you have an iPhone or an Android conference, which used to be a rather risky thing, although now I see people with them fairly common. You go in the settings, you can toggle between Compose and Swift UI to do a compare. In 2022, was that a good comparison? Absolutely not. Right now, you'd be surprised. It's very smooth. And I have an iPhone SE from 2022, and I was like, let me see, I'm sure this will suck. And it was like, it was very smooth. It was as smooth as the other phone, although the icons need a little work. It's a smaller screen. So, also the FlutterCon app, and last night I had to demo Compose for the FlutterCon app to Eric Seidel on an iPhone. It was an interesting moment. Nice guy. So imagine I listed some issues and discussed them, but I cut it for time. And if I'm cutting anything, let's cut the bummers. So apps are shipping now, right? Like for real apps are shipping now. You can go, you can hear about them. And a lot of them you won't hear about because not every company makes a press release about their tech choices, right? But there's a lot of work to do. And here is the thing. I have this, when you see this slide change in my next talk, this means wake up. This is the hello. The community is essential for this vision to happen, right? JetBrains is focused on core work, and they're doing a great job. They obviously do DevRel, but there is so much to do, right? And not just DevRel, but libraries and everything else, okay? Awareness. Nobody knows about this. Nobody, or the state it's in, right? The Android community is like vaguely aware of this thing happening. I would say most people are not aware of just how advanced and how fast this is going. The Flutter community is not aware. They probably won't want to hear about it, but hey, go tell them. iOS community, very simple, similar situation. Not jazzed, but those are in our sphere of influence kind of thing. Then there's general dev community, and that's one thing. But these people are the ones who need to know about this, right? This conversation would actually go a little more like this if you brought this up, right? Like nobody would have an idea what the hell you're talking about. So, I mean, I want it to be just not like React or Flutter, or React or Flutter, or hey, maybe Compose. I want it to be like, well, Compose, unless you can argue for React or Flutter. Like that's what I'm looking for, default. So we also need better framing. Like I used to not say cross-platform and then said multi-platform, and then everyone else said multi-platform. Then it lost its own meaning. I'm just say cross-platform now. But there are a lot of tech decision makers, not those people at those tables, but the senior tech folks who weren't so senior during the native days. They hear cross-platform and they're like, that sounds like garbage. And it's technically not correct anyway. It's not cross-platform on Android. It's not really cross-platform on iOS. You think it's so. Somebody come up with a term. I don't have one yet, but we need one. So if I was going to get business casual sweaty about anything in this, it would be this. Like if you've wanted to publish a library, you're like, I would like to get into open source. And you're like, I'm going to publish an Android library. I got some bad news. It is very difficult to get attention in Android proper with a library. It is a very, very mature ecosystem, but I've been saying this for a while. KMP is an open season. It's not as open now, but it's certainly not that crowded, and it is a growing ecosystem. If you want to have an influential library, get really involved in open source. And here's the thing, your first open source library, you learn a lot. You don't come out of the gate being an open source, like, master of how to do things. Like, you got to go through some mistakes. CMP is very, very much in the stage where it's like you can do a lot. And it's unique because there's a lot of stuff that needs to get added that is, I don't want to, it's straightforward. I was going to use a phrase that made it sort of dismissive. It is like native components that don't exist, that exist maybe on Android side, but they don't exist over here. And you have to write essentially a wrapper and just host the iOS native version of that and come up with a nice similar API you can call from Compose. That is all over the place. We have a live stream where they just show you how to do it. We needed a map view. You just wrap the iOS map view. You pass in data from KMP. The events go back directly into KMP and call stuff. It's not that hard, but it's work. And when people are evaluating technical choices, there's a checkbox that they do. And they're like, man, there's no, it's a library desert. It's like, well, I guess we should use Flutter. I'm like, well, you could just write around it. It's like, yeah, but it's not there. Like, let's fill in those gaps. It's not that bad. Some examples, pull them out of a hat. Obviously maps and these other things. Like, there are a few web views. There's some other options. But if you wanted to do something fun and open source, I think if we had a good contingent of folks doing this, we could fill in these gaps in months, not even. These are mechanical problems. Those are the best kind. I'm not saying these libraries are easy, but they have like clear design patterns and end goals. And designing something from scratch, that is rather difficult, right? Also, extending an existing ecosystem, it is much faster than creating a new one. Like when I talk to people like, oh, Compose is years away. It's like, you don't understand how this works. Compose is not years away. Compose on iOS is just making that work optimally on iOS. It's not starting from scratch. It's a ton of work, but it's going way faster for that reason. And you can talk to me about this. Please wait till after my next talk. But if you want to talk to someone who knows what they're talking about, possibly the most important person at JetBrains to talk about this, possibly the most important person anywhere to talk about this, to get the word out and your thoughts, go see this talk tomorrow, 3:25. I also am experienced with scheduling conferences, and it is more complicated and politically fraught than you'd expect. Don't put someone that parties on day 2 first thing, okay? Like, there's all kinds of shit. But late day 2 is tricky because people like to sneak out. So if you care about this, do not sneak out. The food and drinks will wait. Just go see this and talk to him, and they're doing, the Lord's work over there, so please. And also, by the way, again, the community is here. And I mean, like, the people that are doing crazy stuff are here. He's here. So, I've been obsessed with this concept for like a decade, okay? And Android and iOS are fundamentally sandbox containers, and KMP is native on iOS in the technical sense that it interacts directly with this, and works with the stack and the platform APIs. Adding a performant blendable UI is bringing that concept full circle. Like, I am still obsessed, but at least I don't, there seems to be more people who aren't confused with what I'm obsessed with. Like, so it doesn't feel quite as lonely. All of the pieces are in place to do this. Like, bring native, or mostly native, back to the spaces it left, right? And this community is the only one that can make that happen. There isn't a reasonable Swift version of this, right? Like, there are attempts, but they're bananas. Like, they're never going to work, right? There's no major org involved in them. There are major orgs involved in this. There is an extensive technical groundwork in place, right? This is a very specific possibility at a specific time to a specific community. It is this one. That's it. Call to action. Part of a good keynote, right? Okay. I would say clap, but hold on. Someone's upset. What the hell's everything? It's a Hitchhiker's Guide reference, 42, the question, probably better in London. Had to do it. Anyway, this, Kotlin, WAS, and Compose. If you were already rolling your eyes at the Compose and iOS, I apologize, we're almost done. The shadow of the web. JavaScript infects everything, right? This has bothered me irrationally for years, just like on some level. Why? I had more slides on how terrible the language it is, but I'll just leave that. Come on. I had to cut for time. Also, the open web meant not IE, but is it open, right? Like, everything else is a sandbox container. The web is a pile, and I mean pile in not a good term sense, of JS-specific APIs. Weird. Voted on by some committee. I want SQL. Nope. Why? Don't ask. As an application platform, the browser is just weird, right? I mean, look, the open web's good. I'm not saying that's bad, but a sandbox container would be better. Like, that's what everyone else is. Let's do that. So, cross-platform was all web for years. Again, JavaScript infects everything. React Native still feels like web. A lot of the other things were designed around web. Why? Because everyone was a web dev. I get it. But mobile doesn't have the restrictions that web has, but you had to inherit them if you wanted to do cross-platform, right? Crippled architectural homogeneity. Sorry for the big phrases. You live by the browser rules or you build multiple apps, right? Living in the web's shadow. Many mobile apps don't really do the same thing that the website does, and that's one thing. But like many do, right? Like if you, especially more utility apps like Epic, does the exact same thing, just horribly in all cases. However, you can share code, but you can't share architecture, and that was really just terrible. Not in the same way. So forget UI differences entirely. Like everything is very browser specific. And I'm not talking about content sites like that. Of course, you're not going to build a WASM complex thing to show the schedule. Not that the droidcon site isn't, very complicated. But I'm talking about this, like their website isn't great either. You know what I mean? Like, assuming browser compatibility, there's no reason that this couldn't be some, version of Compose or Flutter or whatever. They're not winning any awards regardless, nor are they trying. Again, this specific app is never going to do anything like this, but when they make the next thing, the new company that's doing this, they might. And that's not to say a WASM site would be bad. It's not inherently bad. I just think, it could be fine. But if it's Compose, like, let's really get on that wide format thing, If WASM, WASM will get big. If Kotlin WASM gets big, I'm expecting numerous other UI options, WASM controlling DOM, like other Canvas UIs that are just totally different, like whatever. KMP is flexible. Like you could, we have an Android and iOS UI. We'll talk about that in 11.15. You could have a mobile UI and a web UI, like whatever. You can just carve out layers. It's great. So finally, we get to maybe look at this question, which I've been asking for a long time. I would like to know. And then I get into these debates, sometimes debates. I try not to. You get older, I'm like, no, I agree with it. That's fine. Like whatever. But they turn really binary very fast. It's like this, it'll never replace JS. And it's like, of course it's not going to replace JS, right? It just needs to be productive. It doesn't have to replace it. With good libraries and tools. Basically, it can't be more work to do WASM than JS. And that's not exactly a high bar. But I would also remind people when they think like JS is everywhere, forget it. I mean, this was a thing. And I honestly clicked this link and Adobe, I don't know what I was expecting, but Flash held up like half the web forever. And you get a vague, somber gradient and then an ad for whatever the hell Express is. I mean, disrespectful. Anyway. Totally different situations. I get it. Like, I'm not saying JS is going to get killed because someone gets on stage and say you can't use JS. But JS being everywhere, doesn't mean it needs to stay everywhere, is essentially what I'm saying. WASM's been a few years off forever, so I get the eye rolls. But, like, if you've been paying attention, Safari, the last domino, is going to get the GC profile soon. What does that mean? Well, it means something pretty important. I'm not going to go into it now. We're out of time. But also this thing, Project Fugu, go check it out. It's adding some neat things to the browser, but fundamentally this is the message. Web apps should be able to do anything iOS, Android, and desktop can. I agree. That's what I want. It'll be great. It's this, architectural homogeneity, a sandbox container. Probably still a funky browser version of that, but you're going to be able to do what you want, right? App things in a browser. WASM is wide open. There's no clear default language. But you don't need a default language. That's kind of the point. I think when I talk to JS people, they're like, well, you can't replace JS. I'm like, what? You don't need one language. You've been living in a one language world your whole career. You don't understand. There's lots of languages out in the world. But Kotlin seems like a pretty great option. And it's wide open, so it can happen. So if you ask me in 2014, where are we going to be now? Sad face, right? Probably all web. I think everyone thought that. If you ask me today, where are we going to be? What have you been doing? I've been talking about this for 45 minutes. Native isn't going anywhere, but it can be everywhere. If you'll forgive the abuse of native for a good quote. Thank you. Have a great DroidCon.